After a heavy downpour, the city streets were covered in mud and water puddles were scattered everywhere along the roadside. An elderly gentleman known as Papa Thomas was seated peacefully on a wooden bench positioned near the street. His clothing was aged and his footwear showed signs of wear, yet he appeared serene. He had just completed sweeping duties in front of a small shop and was taking a moment to rest before heading home. Without warning, a black Range Rover sped through the narrow street. The vehicle did not reduce its speed and drove directly through a large puddle. A massive splash of dirty water surged upward and completely drenched Papa Thomas from his head to his feet. The elderly man drew in a sharp breath and attempted to clean his face with his hand, but the harm was already inflicted. His shirt, pants, and even his worn slippers were now saturated with brown, muddy water. Bystanders paused and gazed in disbelief. One woman called out angrily at the vehicle, asking what they had done. The car did not halt. It moved forward slowly before eventually stopping just a short distance ahead. The dark-tinted window lowered. A haughty female voice emerged from the vehicle stating that he should not sit so near to the road and that this was not his village. The window then rolled back up and the car drove away quickly. The crowd remained quiet momentarily. One man questioned with his mouth agape whether she had actually said that. Another woman exclaimed that she was wicked and asked why she could not apologize. Someone else added that it was excessive since Papa Thomas was always peaceful and kind and questioned why he should be treated in such a manner. However, the old man lifted one hand and spoke gently, saying it was acceptable to leave her alone and let God be the judge. Meanwhile, the woman in the black Range Rover named Vanessa reached a high-end shopping center. As she entered the building, her phone buzzed. She took a photograph of herself and shared it online with a message stating that only the strong walk over the weak and called herself a boss queen. Within moments, comments appeared praising her as a queen of queens and telling her to teach them. She smiled with satisfaction. To her, her actions meant nothing. She believed poor people held no worth, had no voice, and had no reason to obstruct her path. She had constructed her life with arrogance, stepping on anyone she considered inferior to her. Papa Thomas returned home that evening feeling tired but remaining calm. He opened the door and entered the spacious living room of their magnificent mansion. Although he dressed modestly and frequently visited impoverished neighborhoods, his son Bernard was a wealthy individual. Their home contained everything, including elegant furniture, plush carpets, and costly artwork displayed on the walls, but none of these possessions held much significance for the elderly man. Bernard was positioned on the sofa reading something on his tablet when he observed his father entering. He asked what had happened to his shirt, noting that it appeared he had experienced another difficult day. Papa Thomas sat down carefully and shook his head, stating that he had encountered the most impolite woman that day. Bernard sighed, expressing that he did not understand why his father continued going out there, and questioning why he could not stop this behavior. He mentioned that his father did not need to sit on the roadside or speak to random people since he now lived in a mansion and had everything he required. Papa Thomas looked at his son with peaceful eyes, declaring that he would never stop until he found a good woman for him. Bernard dropped the tablet and expressed his frustration with this topic again. Papa Thomas stated firmly that Bernard was already 36 years old and needed a wife, someone who would build with him rather than simply enjoy what he possessed. Bernard rubbed his forehead and sighed, explaining that he had a girlfriend. The old man turned quickly, asking if this was true. Bernard confirmed that he had been seeing someone. Papa Thomas questioned why he had not been told about this earlier. Bernard replied that he had not wanted to rush things, but since the topic was being raised again, he would share the information. Papa Thomas leaned forward, asking who she was, where she was from, and what she did. Bernard smiled slightly, stating that his father would meet her soon and not to worry, as she was very beautiful. The old man raised an eyebrow, commenting that beauty was not everything. Bernard acknowledged this but mentioned there was a problem. When asked what problem, Bernard hesitated before speaking. He explained that she was rude, very rude. Papa Thomas leaned back slowly. Bernard continued, explaining that she talked down to people, was proud, thought everyone was below her, and worst of all, spent money carelessly. He gave her money and she purchased things she did not need, including expensive clothes, shoes, and bags just to show off. Papa Thomas shook his head silently. When asked why he remained with her, Bernard looked away, stating he did not know. He suggested it might be because she was beautiful, or because he thought he could change her. He mentioned she was intelligent, and sometimes when she was calm, she was sweet, but when she became angry or felt insulted, she transformed into someone else. His father remained quiet for a while before asking whether she respected him sometimes and whether she respected herself. Bernard did not answer. Papa Thomas sighed deeply and told Bernard to listen to him. He explained that he had been observing women all his life, and knew how they behaved even from their walking and talking patterns. Bernard needed a woman who would bring peace into his home, not noise, and a woman who would help him grow rather than waste what he had worked for. Bernard acknowledged that he knew his father was correct. Papa Thomas then requested that Bernard bring her home so he could see her with his own eyes. He wanted to speak with her and look into her eyes. If he saw humility, he would bless the union, but if he saw pride, he would tell the truth even if it caused pain. Bernard nodded, slowly agreeing to speak with her and suggesting she could visit that weekend. The old man approved but instructed Bernard not to tell her anything special and to let her come as she was, since he wanted to meet her real self, not the public persona she displayed. Bernard chuckled, asking if his father wanted to surprise her. Papa Thomas replied calmly that he wanted her to surprise herself. As Bernard stood to get a glass of water, his father watched him with quiet concern. He was proud of his son, who was intelligent, successful, and kind, but love could make even the wisest man blind. On another hot afternoon, Papa Thomas sat quietly outside a large supermarket wearing his simple clothes with a plastic bowl in front of him. Some people dropped small change while others did not even look at him. He did not beg but simply sat there. Then the sound came as a black Range Rover stopped sharply at the front. Vanessa stepped out with her eyes hidden behind dark glasses and loud music playing in her car. She saw Papa Thomas, made a disapproving sound, and walked closer. She snapped at him, calling him the same old dirty-smelling man and questioning why he continued disgracing his generation in such a manner. She did not wait for a reply and asked if he enjoyed sitting there like a goat, stating that poor people like him had no shame. Papa Thomas remained silent. She continued insulting him about his clothes and face, calling him useless and suggesting he might be cursed. She remained silent throughout her verbal assault. She accused him of being the reason Nigeria was backward, sitting there waiting for help instead of dying quietly. She then spat near his feet and expressed disgust. At that moment, a young woman carrying 2 grocery bags emerged from the supermarket. She paused, observed the situation, then set down her bags and said enough. Vanessa turned and asked who she was. The woman named Mary replied that she was someone who still had sense. Vanessa laughed, calling her another poor rat trying to feel important. Mary stated sharply that Vanessa was insulting an old man for no reason and asked what he had done to her. Vanessa barked that he existed and that was what he had done, adding that poor dirty men like him should not be outside. Mary stepped forward, pointing out that he was old enough to be her father. Vanessa shouted, asking if he was her father, and suggesting he was probably Mary's father since they both looked poor. Mary's eyes narrowed as she responded that perhaps he was, but at least he was not empty like Vanessa. Vanessa laughed again, asking if Mary knew who she was and who her boyfriend was, threatening that she could have Mary arrested in 2 minutes. Mary did not blink and questioned whether she would be arrested for telling someone to respect an old man. Vanessa yelled that she was rich and could do anything. Mary fired back that she was loud, not rich in character. Mary scoffed, calling her just noisy with lipstick and nothing more. Vanessa's face changed as she stepped forward, asking how Mary dared to speak to her in that manner. Mary replied affirmatively because nobody had ever taught Vanessa how to behave. Vanessa threatened that Mary would regret this, to which Mary responded calmly that Vanessa would regret it instead. Mary predicted that one day, the same man Vanessa insulted would be someone she would need to bow to. Vanessa's hands shook as Mary pointed and told her to take her proud legs and leave. Vanessa stared with tight lips and a red face before turning, storming into her car, slamming the door, and speeding off. Mary then turned to Papa Thomas and apologized. He looked at her gently and thanked his daughter. She smiled and said she could not let Vanessa speak to him in that manner. He nodded slowly, noting that these days, not many people spoke up as she had done. Mary looked around, then walked closer, asking what his name was. He said simply that it was Thomas, and people just called him Papa Thomas. She sat beside him and introduced herself as Mary. He smiled and complimented her nice name. She looked into his eyes and asked where he stayed. He hesitated, then said quietly that he slept in an empty store at the edge of town where the owner allowed him to stay. It was not much, but it kept the rain away. Mary's face dropped as she expressed her sympathy. He shook his head gently, telling her not to be sorry, as life had its seasons. He might be poor, but he still had his peace. She commented that he seemed too wise to be out there. He gave a weak smile, saying that life taught wisdom when you had nothing. She looked at him for a while, then mentioned that she had studied agriculture and was a graduate. It had been 1 year without finding a job, and her parents were poor farmers in the village. He nodded slowly, acknowledging that she was trying. She continued explaining her idea that instead of just sitting there, perhaps she could help him start a small farm even behind the store. They could plant simple things like pepper, tomatoes, and vegetables which would provide him with food, and they could sell the surplus. Papa Thomas looked at her with surprise, asking if she wanted to help him farm. She confirmed this, explaining that she had nothing else at the moment but had strength and could work. It was better than waiting. He would eat fresh food and could stop begging for coins. He sat still, thinking deeply, then said quietly that she was too kind. She shook her head, explaining that she simply believed good people deserved help too. He looked up at her, commenting that she hardly knew him. She smiled and said she knew enough, noting that he had not said a word when that woman insulted him, and that silence told her everything. Papa Thomas smiled slowly, acknowledging that she was different. She said she tried to be. He nodded, saying he would think about it. She said playfully to think fast, as they could start with a small basket of okra, and even that could change something. They both laughed softly. Mary stood, picked up her bags, and waved goodbye, saying she would see him tomorrow. He nodded, confirming he would be there. She said good and told him not to go missing. She walked off smiling. Papa Thomas sat back watching her go as something stirred in his chest, not sadness or shame, but hope. He looked up at the sky and whispered, asking the Lord if she could be the one. Papa Thomas walked into the house with a wide smile on his face. The heavy wooden door closed behind him, and he removed his sandals quietly. The mansion was peaceful and cool. He looked around and saw his son sitting quietly in the living room. He cleared his throat and called Bernard's name. Bernard responded, and his father announced that he had met someone that day. Bernard looked up, asking who. Papa Thomas walked over and sat down, explaining that he had met the most beautiful and respectful, well-mannered woman he had ever seen in his life. Bernard raised his eyebrows, asking if this was really true. Papa Thomas confirmed it was true, clarifying that he was not talking about makeup, hair, or fancy shoes, but about a heart, a clean heart, a woman with sense, dignity, and courage. Bernard sat back, asking what had happened. Papa Thomas explained that he was outside the supermarket when that same proud woman came again, the one who always insulted him as if he was nothing. She opened her mouth that day and poured all kinds of shameful words on him. Bernard clenched his fist lightly, asking if it happened again. Papa Thomas confirmed, but explained that this time something different occurred as he smiled. A young woman saw what was happening, and before he could even say a word, she stood up for him. Bernard asked if she really did that. Papa Thomas confirmed that she insulted that proud girl without fear, not shouting like a mad person, but speaking with clean yet strong words filled with fire and wisdom. That rude girl had no choice but to walk away in shame. Bernard remained silent as Papa Thomas continued, explaining that afterward, she came to sit with him without rushing or acting proud. She simply sat down and asked if he was okay, treating him like someone who mattered. Bernard asked what her name was, and Papa Thomas replied that it was Mary. Bernard repeated the name questioningly, and his father confirmed it. Papa Thomas continued, explaining that he told her he was just a poor man with no home, and she did not laugh or judge. He asked Bernard if he knew what she said, and Bernard waited for the answer. She had offered to help him. Bernard looked surprised as Papa Thomas explained that she was a graduate who had studied agriculture but had no job yet. Her parents were farmers too, but instead of complaining, she told him they could start a small farm together. She offered to help him find peace through hard work again. Bernard said softly that his father was not serious, but Papa Thomas replied that he was very serious. He had always wanted to go back to farming, and although Bernard had told him to stop saying he was old, that was where he found joy and felt alive. Bernard sighed, reminding his father that they had discussed this, and that he did not need to farm anymore but should rest and enjoy his old age. Papa Thomas responded that rest without purpose was just waiting to die, and that farming was not just about food to him but about peace, patience, and strength. His body might be old but his spirit was still strong. Bernard looked down without speaking as Papa Thomas leaned forward, explaining that this girl Mary had reminded him of the man he used to be. She brought light into his heart that day, and more than that, she gave him hope again. Bernard rubbed his palms slowly across his chin as Papa Thomas added that he was telling him this not because he needed permission but because he had seen something special. That girl was gold, and although she might not have money, she had character, which was what wealth could not buy. Bernard lifted his eyes and mentioned that he had not wanted to say this, but his girlfriend was coming tomorrow. Papa Thomas leaned back, asking what he wanted him to do with that information. Bernard paused, explaining that she wanted to meet him. Papa Thomas said sharply that it was none of his business because that day he had met a woman who made him forget that rudeness still existed, a girl who respected him without knowing who he was. Bernard's girlfriend might be coming tomorrow, but that day he had already met the kind of woman this world needed. Bernard went silent as Papa Thomas continued, explaining that he had been watching Bernard, who was rich but alone, had houses but no joy, had friends but no peace. A wife should bring peace, not noise, pride, or trouble. Bernard said he understood, but Papa Thomas replied calmly that he did not. Bernard claimed to have a girlfriend, but Papa Thomas did not know her, did not know where she was from, what she believed in, or how she treated people. Bernard told him she was beautiful, which was fine, but Papa Thomas questioned whether beauty could feed the heart. Bernard looked away as the old man continued sharing a story. When Papa Thomas was young, he had wanted to marry the most beautiful girl in his village despite his mother's warnings. That girl had the face of an angel, but the tongue of a lion, and almost destroyed his soul. When asked what happened, Papa Thomas explained that she left him, which was the best thing that ever happened because that was when he met Bernard's mother. She was not the most beautiful, but her heart was clean, her hands were hardworking, and her love built their family. Bernard swallowed hard as Papa Thomas clarified that he was not making any definitive statements about Mary yet. All he was saying was not to bring him noise tomorrow and expect him to smile because he had already seen peace that day. Bernard acknowledged this, and Papa Thomas said to let his girlfriend come and show him who she really was, but he would not pretend. If he saw pride, he would tell her to her face. Bernard stood quietly and nodded, expressing his respect for that position. Papa Thomas smiled and said good, noting that he had done his part, and tomorrow they would see. The next morning came quietly as Papa Thomas had already bathed and was sitting in the living room. He wore clean, simple clothes and his face was calm, though his heart was not. He was thinking about Mary and kept hearing her voice in his head offering to help him. He smiled to himself before hearing footsteps. Bernard walked in and stood beside him, announcing that she was on her way. Papa Thomas looked straight ahead and said to let her come. Minutes later, the sound of a car entering the compound filled the air, but Papa Thomas did not move. The door opened slowly as high heels tapped against the floor. Then Vanessa walked in with pride on her face and handbags swinging by her side. She looked around the house impressed, commenting that the place was nice though not as modern as hers but still acceptable. Then her eyes landed on the old man sitting calmly on the couch, and she froze as her smile vanished. Papa Thomas looked up at her but said nothing. Bernard stood between them, confused, as his father announced that he knew who she was. Vanessa swallowed hard, asking if it was him. He replied calmly that it was and that they had met before twice. Bernard looked at her, asking if she knew his father. Vanessa's lips shook as she said she did not know he was Bernard's father. Papa Thomas responded that she did not need to know that, she only needed to show respect. Bernard's face changed as he asked what his father was talking about. Papa Thomas turned to his son, explaining that this was the same woman who had splashed mud on him by the roadside and called him names, telling him he was useless and mocking his poverty. She had done it again at the supermarket yesterday. Bernard slowly turned to Vanessa, who could not speak, asking if this was true. She said quickly that she did not know he was Bernard's father. Bernard replied that she did not need to know that, and questioned how she could insult an old man in public twice. She shouted that she thought he was a beggar, to which Bernard snapped that he was a human being, and even if he was a beggar, that was not how to treat people. She said, almost whispering, that she did not mean it like that. Papa Thomas stood slowly, stating that she did not mean it, but she said it. She poured shame on him because he looked poor and spoke as if she owned the world, but now the same old man was the father of the man she loved. Vanessa opened her mouth, but no words came out. Papa Thomas asked her to tell him whether she would have behaved better if she had known, and she said softly that she would have. He replied that she was not truly kind because real kindness did not depend on who was watching. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears as she pleaded for forgiveness. Papa Thomas shook his head, explaining that she was not sorry for what she did but sorry because of who he was. Bernard was silent, breathing hard with sharp, disappointed eyes. He told Vanessa that she had said she was bold and claimed to love him. She insisted she did love him, but he responded that she loved herself because the woman who loved him would respect his father. Vanessa dropped her bag, pleading with Bernard. He looked at her one last time, then turned away, telling his father that he had made a mistake. Vanessa walked slowly to Papa Thomas, asking for forgiveness. He looked at her quietly and said that forgiveness was easy but trust was not. She had a chance to show who she really was, and she had shown them. She wiped her tears, saying she could change. He nodded, saying that was good, and she should start by changing how she treated people who could do nothing for her. She picked up her bag and left as the room became silent again. Papa Thomas sat down and Bernard sat beside him. Bernard called his father's name, and when he responded, Bernard said Mary's name. Papa Thomas confirmed and asked where she was now. Papa Thomas smiled gently, explaining that she was coming to see him at the supermarket tomorrow. The next morning, Bernard left the house quietly, needing fresh air and time to think. What had happened with Vanessa still played in his mind like a movie, and he could not believe the woman he had once loved had insulted his father not once but twice. His heart was heavy as he drove out alone without a driver or assistant, just him and his thoughts. He did not even know where he was going but just wanted to breathe. After some time, he parked his car at the edge of a quiet area near a small stretch of land behind some local stores. He got out, walked a bit, and sat on a bench under a mango tree. The sun was still rising and the breeze was soft. For the first time in days, he felt calm. As he sat, he noticed someone ahead, a young woman standing beside a narrow piece of land checking the ground. She had a bag of seeds in one hand and a small hoe in the other. She was dressed simply with her hair tied back, no makeup, no flashy clothes, but there was something warm about her. She bent down, tested the soil with her fingers, then stood again. Bernard watched quietly. After a few minutes, she looked around and noticed him, smiling and saying good morning. Bernard replied with good morning as well. She walked closer, asking if he was from around there. He replied that he was just passing by. She nodded, saying she needed a break too, though not really a break as she was planning to start a small farm there. Bernard looked at the land, asking about the farm. She laughed, confirming it, and asking why not. He commented that most young ladies he knew would not touch a hoe, let alone start a farm. She smiled, saying she was not like most ladies and had studied agriculture in school. She had no job yet but had hands and a strong back. Bernard was impressed, noting that was rare. She dropped her bag and extended her hand, introducing herself as Mary. He shook it and said his name was Bernard. They both smiled as she sat on a rock beside him. She explained that she was trying to help an old man who had no real home but was kind and wise, reminding her of her father. Bernard turned with interest, asking, "Really?" She confirmed, explaining that she had met him yesterday when he was being insulted by a woman, and she could not keep quiet, so she stood up for him. Bernard's heart skipped as Mary continued, explaining that after the drama, she found out he did not beg for money but just sat quietly watching the world. She told him she would help him start a small farm so he could eat fresh food and feel useful. Bernard looked at her deeply, noting that she did not brag or shout but spoke with peace in her voice. He commented that he wished more people thought like her. She laughed, saying they were out there, just hidden, and asked if he lived nearby. He replied that he took the bus from the other side of town, acknowledging it was not easy but he could not stay home doing nothing. Bernard nodded, saying he admired that. She looked at him asking what he did, and Bernard hesitated before saying business. She responded that business was the favorite Nigerian word, and they both laughed. She said she would not ask too many questions as he looked like someone with a lot on his mind. Bernard smiled, confirming she was right. She stood saying she needed to plant the seeds before the sun got too hot. He stood with her asking if he could help. She raised a brow, commenting on his clean shoes and soft hands. He said he could learn, and she smiled, agreeing they could start with okra. Just like that they began, two strangers from two worlds working on one small farm. It was late afternoon as Papa Thomas sat quietly at his usual spot near the supermarket. His eyes were soft, and his thoughts were far away. He was not thinking about money or food but about Mary, her kindness, her courage, and her words. Suddenly, a cheerful voice pulled him out of his thoughts, calling Papa. He looked up to see Mary smiling and walking toward him with a small basket in her hand. She reached him and sat down gently beside him, announcing that she had brought him something. He asked warmly what it was, and she replied that it was just some fresh vegetables and boiled groundnuts, noting it was not much. Papa Thomas opened the basket and smiled, saying it was everything and thanking his daughter while asking God to bless her hands. Mary laughed and said amen. They sat quietly for a moment before she leaned closer, announcing that she had good news. His eyes brightened as he asked her to tell him. She announced that she had found land. He asked with surprise if she really had. She confirmed it belonged to her uncle, and she had told him what she wanted to do. He said she could use part of it for farming. It was a small space but enough to start with okra and vegetables. He expressed that this was good and asked when they were going. Mary smiled widely, saying tomorrow morning if he was ready. Papa Thomas paused, then gently shook his head, saying they could not go to the farm tomorrow. Mary looked confused, asking why not. He explained that she was coming to his house tomorrow. She blinked, asking about his house, but noting that he had said he slept in a shop. He smiled and said to just come, as he would explain everything to her. She raised an eyebrow, asking if he was hiding something. He joked that he was hiding peace and she would understand tomorrow. She laughed, asking when they were going to the farm. He suggested they go on the weekend, and she nodded in agreement, commenting that he was full of surprises. He reached into his pocket and gave her a small paper with his address, telling her not to be late. Mary took the paper, looked at it, and shook her head, saying she was really curious now. She paused, then added shyly that she had also met someone that day. Papa Thomas leaned forward, asking who. She looked down and smiled, saying just someone, a man who was very handsome and kind, very humble, and that she liked him though they were just friends for now. The old man's eyes widened as he said he wanted to see him since he was her second father now and must see him with his own eyes. She shook her head playfully, telling him to calm down. He grinned, asking if they were going to see each other tomorrow. She hesitated, then confirmed they would see each other tomorrow. As she walked away, Papa Thomas whispered to himself to let tomorrow begin the truth. Later that evening, Papa Thomas returned to the house where the big mansion was quiet. He walked into the living room and saw Bernard sitting there. Bernard called his father, saying he could tell him something. Papa Thomas replied yes, and Bernard announced that he had met someone that day. Papa Thomas sat down, already smiling inside, asking if he had. Bernard confirmed he had met a woman not like the others, who was beautiful but simple, intelligent but calm, and hard-working. She was farming under the sun. Papa Thomas leaned forward, asking what her name was. Bernard replied Mary. The old man closed his eyes briefly and smiled. Bernard added that she was the first woman who had ever made him want to sit and listen without rushing. Papa Thomas spoke slowly, saying he would like to meet her. Bernard replied that he would very soon. The old man leaned back and smiled again, whispering in his heart that tomorrow Bernard would meet her in the most unexpected way. The next morning, Mary stood in front of a large black gate holding her simple handbag and the address Papa Thomas had given her. She looked up and down, double-checked the number, then looked again, whispering that the place was too fine and questioning if this was really where Papa Thomas lived. A security man stepped out of the small gate beside the main one, asking if he could help her. Mary nodded, saying she was there to see Papa Thomas and that he had given her the address yesterday. The man looked her over, then said to wait there before walking back inside. Mary clutched her bag tighter, with her heart beating faster, sensing that something was not right. She had come expecting to see a small home or maybe a family friend of Papa Thomas, but this mansion was nothing like that. It had tall white walls, big flowers in front, and a smooth driveway. The air even smelled different. Before she could overthink it, the gate opened and the security man told her to come in. Mary walked in slowly with her sandals tapping gently on the smooth tiled floor outside. She stopped near the wide entrance, stunned by the beauty around her. The house looked like something from a magazine with clean walls, glass windows, flower pots, and a calm silence. Then she heard footsteps and someone calling her name. She turned slowly and froze as it was Bernard, the same man she had met near the farm, the same man who had helped her with the seeds, the one she had laughed with, the one she liked. He stood there dressed simply but still looking like the man she could not stop thinking about. Their eyes locked as she whispered his name. He stepped forward with eyes wide with disbelief, saying her name in return. She looked around again, noting that he lived there. Before he could reply, another voice came from behind him calling her his daughter. She looked past Bernard and saw Papa Thomas walking out of the living room, smiling from ear to ear. Mary gasped, saying Papa, and took 2 steps back, asking if he lived there. Papa Thomas chuckled and walked toward her, confirming that this was his house. She asked about his claim of sleeping in a shop, and he nodded calmly, explaining that he had said that because he wanted to see how people treated him when they thought he had nothing. Mary's eyes moved from Papa Thomas to Bernard and back again as she pointed at Bernard, asking if he was his son. Bernard smiled slowly, confirming that he was. Mary covered her mouth in shock, saying she did not understand as everything did not make sense. Papa Thomas walked closer, apologizing for hiding the truth but explaining that she had shown him her real heart. She had helped him when she thought he was a poor, homeless old man, which was something rare in this world. Mary's eyes watered as she accused him of testing her. He said softly that he was not testing but watching, as life had taught him to observe. Many people passed the rich and knelt for them but spat on the poor. She had done the opposite by giving him food, offering to farm with him, and making him feel seen. She looked at Bernard, asking about him. Bernard stepped closer, explaining that he did not know either, and had met her by chance, never imagining she would be the same person his father kept talking about. She shook her head slowly, holding back tears, saying this was too much. Papa Thomas smiled, noting that it was good because now no one could say she was chasing money since she did not know anything and just followed her heart. Mary looked down, claiming she had not done anything special. Bernard said gently that she had been kind to a man she thought had nothing, which was rare and powerful. Silence fell between them for a moment before Papa Thomas broke it, telling Mary to come inside as she was home now. She looked up again, still emotional and overwhelmed, asking softly if he was sure. Bernard extended his hand, saying yes please, and she took his hand as they walked into the house together, not as strangers but as something more, something real. The house was quiet now, with Papa Thomas having gone inside to rest, leaving Bernard and Mary alone in the large, beautiful living room. Bernard sat beside Mary on the couch, looking at her and unsure how to begin, but he did not wait too long. He said her name gently, explaining that he did not want to waste time. She turned and looked at him as he continued, acknowledging that they had just met, but he felt something strong, something he had never felt before. Mary listened with her eyes fixed on him as he clearly stated that he loved her from the very first time he saw her. She blinked slowly as he explained that he did not just admire her or enjoy her company but loved her strength, her calmness, her confidence, and the fact that his father loved her too was a big plus for him. He leaned forward with a sincere voice, telling Mary he wanted to marry her as soon as possible. She looked at him speechless for a moment before saying softly that she was not going to lie and that she loved him too. From the first moment they met near the farm, she felt peace and did not even know who he was but felt safe with him. He smiled with a full heart as she smiled too. She said gently that if he truly wanted to marry her, she would say yes. Bernard reached for her hand and held it firmly, thanking her and calling her the most beautiful and intelligent woman he had ever seen, announcing that she was going to be his wife. Mary blushed, but her face turned serious as she mentioned there was something she must do first. He asked what it was and she explained that she had to go to the village to tell her parents who lived there and must know. Bernard paused as her words echoed in his head about her parents living in the village. He sat up straight, saying that could not continue. She looked confused, asking what he meant and mentioning her parents. Bernard stated firmly that his parents-in-law could not live in the village while he lived in a mansion. Her eyes widened as he explained that he had many houses in the city and would give them one. He wanted them to stop farming and leave the village as they had suffered enough, and he wanted them to enjoy peace now. Mary stared at him with her mouth open and hands frozen, asking if he would really do that for them. Bernard explained that he was not marrying only her but marrying into her family and must honor them like he honored his own father. Tears welled in Mary's eyes as she said that no one had ever said something like that to her before. He gently wiped her tears, saying she was worth it, and that from that day, her struggle was his struggle and her joy was his joy. News spread quickly in the city that Bernard, the quiet billionaire, was getting married, but not to a rich girl or celebrity but to a simple, respectful lady named Mary. People were shocked, with some smiling and praising his choice while others were jealous. But no one was more angry than Vanessa. She heard the news from one of her friends at a spa, asking sharply what she had just said. The friend confirmed that Bernard was getting married to that girl, and she had even heard she was from the village. Vanessa's expression grew dark and angry, her jaw clenching as her hands trembled with rage. How dare he treat me this way, she thought. She rushed out of the spa and got into her vehicle, seething with fury. Later that evening, she contacted a dangerous man called Sko who was known for carrying out illicit activities. She spoke to him in an icy tone, requesting his services. When he asked what she needed, she explained her sinister plan to hide illegal substances in Bernard's workplace, and then tip off the authorities. This would result in his arrest, public humiliation, and imprisonment, effectively ruining the upcoming wedding. She paused before adding more disturbing requests about harming Mary and Bernard's elderly father permanently. Sko remained quiet throughout the conversation, and she hung up believing her scheme was set in motion. However, Vanessa was unaware of a crucial detail. Sko had a personal connection to Bernard. Years earlier, Bernard had been instrumental in helping Sko's older sister by offering her employment at his company when others had rejected her. When their mother fell seriously ill, Bernard covered all the medical expenses. He had even assisted Sko's family with rent payments when they faced eviction. That night, Sko reflected on this irony. The very person Vanessa wanted destroyed was the same man who had rescued his family from desperate circumstances. He refused to betray such kindness. Sko decided to call Vanessa back, this time recording their conversation. When she answered, he asked her to repeat all the details of her plan. She gleefully complied, describing exactly how the drugs should be planted and reiterating her deadly intentions toward Bernard's father and Mary before the wedding ceremony. After ending the call and saving the evidence, Sko went directly to Bernard's office the following morning. Bernard was occupied with wedding preparations and business matters when Sko requested a brief meeting. Though Bernard didn't recognize him initially, Sko explained that Bernard had helped his family years ago and that he was now returning the favor. He then revealed Vanessa's entire plot, playing the recorded conversation. As Bernard listened to Vanessa's voice detailing her malicious plans and expressing her desire to harm Mary and his father, his face showed shock and disbelief. When the recording finished, Bernard was overwhelmed by the realization of how close they had come to disaster. He thanked Sko profusely for his integrity and loyalty. The authorities were contacted immediately. Vanessa was apprehended while dining at an upscale restaurant, showing off her new purchases. She protested her innocence and demanded to know why she was being arrested. The officers informed her of the charges, including conspiracy to commit murder and attempted evidence tampering. Despite her loud objections, she was taken into custody. During her court appearance, Vanessa wore a formal black outfit and maintained her innocent facade, claiming ignorance about the accusations. The judge listened silently before signaling to an officer to play the recorded evidence. Vanessa's own voice filled the courtroom as she clearly articulated her evil schemes, including her cruel comments about Papa Thomas and her threats against Mary. The recording captured her laughter and complete lack of remorse. When it concluded, the courtroom fell silent as everyone stared at her in shock. Vanessa's composure crumbled as she began weeping, claiming she hadn't meant what she said and blaming alcohol and outside influences for her words. The judge firmly rejected her excuses, stating that no external force had compelled her to speak those words or plan such evil deeds. Despite her pleas for mercy, she was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Back home, Bernard shared the entire ordeal with Mary, who was both horrified and grateful for their narrow escape. They acknowledged how differently things could have ended if not for Sko's moral courage. That weekend, they visited Mary's family in her hometown. Bernard knelt before her parents, formally asking for their daughter's hand in marriage and inviting them to relocate to the city where he had prepared a home for them, insisting they deserved rest after years of hard work. Mary's mother wept with joy while her father gave his blessing. A month later, Bernard and Mary celebrated their wedding in a beautiful ceremony surrounded by loved ones. Following the festivities, they departed quietly for their honeymoon, enjoying romantic walks along the shoreline. As they strolled barefoot in the sand, Mary expressed her amazement at how wonderful her life had become. Bernard assured her that their happiness was genuine and would last forever.